Hey guys, this is your High Fist here with another juicy topic. Here again to shock my precious subscribers with a brand new video less than a week after the last one. Steven Erickson neither shared nor commented on the last video, but he did post a five-part essay on writing as a response to what I posted. So I'm taking all the credit for that, as is my right. So to Steven Erickson, I say thank you. And to all Malazan fans, I say you're welcome for having inspired that. You can find the essay on his Facebook page, and he goes into some of the deeper aspects of what I touched on. So do yourself a favor and read it if you haven't already. It's great stuff. Today, guys, we are analyzing the scene in Book 9 where Draconus re enters the world. It has to be one of the most epic scenes ever written. The descriptions, the writing, the carnage, the scale of the whole thing, it just blows me away every single time. In fact, during my first read, I remembered it as a really long and epic sequence where the entire sky gets sundered and a whole army gets crushed to pulp and mountains explode and the entire landscape shatters, blah blah. It wasn't until the second time I read the 10 big books that I realized the whole thing was actually a really short scene. In fact, the entire scene is less than 500 words. It's barely over a page long. It's about a page and a half long. But the writing and descriptions are so strong that that small space is all Erickson needs to create this cataclysmic epic sequence. 500 words might be nothing, but he manages to give us this sensory experience where we see all this crazy stuff happening. So let's dissect the scene. Let me pull up the quotes. The descent of darkness broke frozen bone and flesh across the width of the valley, spilling out beyond the north ridge, devouring the last flickering flames from the burning heaps that had once been bargast wagons. So we immediately see Erickson at work here, where he takes a malleable word like darkness and creates a special effect for us, as I discussed in the last video. It starts with the descent of darkness broke frozen bone and flesh, which immediately does two things, right? One, it makes us visualize the scene where a landscape just gets covered in darkness. But at the same time, Erickson also plays with the idea of darkness and shows that the darkness here is something tangible which breaks bones from the pressure and weight of it. He also gives us a visual cue to imagine the vastness of the landscape. This recurs in most of Erickson's large action set pieces. He often conjures these images of a large panoramic canvas. And here he tells us that this darkness is covering the width of an entire valley and spilling beyond the north ridge, once again making the darkness look like something tangible, but this time it's with a liquidy quality as well. And what does this darkness do? It's devouring the flames from the burning Bargas wagons because there was a big war where both sides got wiped out by the Naruk. So there's a lot of symbolism there as well. So just look at how, in a single sentence, Erickson packs so many things. We have the darkness, we have the light from the flickering flames, we hear the crunch of bones snapping, we see this vast landscape of an entire valley that's just been a battlefield with the dead strewn all over the place. We visualize the darkness as something solid where it breaks bones. We then visualize it as something liquid where it's spilling over a ridge. And this is all just the first sentence. This is just the opening line. Let's keep going. The vast battlefield glistened and sparkled as corpses and carcasses shriveled, losing their last remnants of moisture, and earth buckled, lurching upward in long wedges of stone-hard clay that jostled bodies. Iron steamed and glowed amongst the dead. Here again, just look at the sensory cues being given and the power of the words that he's using. You can almost feel the heat as you visually imagine corpses shriveling dry and the weapons steaming. And we see the earth breaking and pillars of clay just spike up from the ground with all that crazy pressure. The sky above was devoid of all light, but the ashes drifting down were visible, as if each flake was lit from within. The pressure continued pushing everything closer to the ground until horses and armored men and women became flattened, rumpled forms. Weapons suddenly exploded, white hot shards hissing. Pause and consider how cinematic this whole thing is. So, this entire valley is shrouded in darkness, and the enormity of this power is enough to flatten and crush everything in sight. The heat and pressure are both so unbearable that even the weapons are exploding as white hot shards. And yet, within all that, there's this haunting beauty where the ash is almost like luminescent snow, where everything is just covered in pitch black darkness, but you can see each individual flake of ash almost like fireflies in the night. And stuff like this is something we see a lot with Ericsson's epic action scenes as well, where there's always some kind of eerie beauty in the carnage. The hillsides groaned, visibly contracted, as something swirled in the very center of the valley, a darkness so profound as to be a solid thing. A hill cracked in half with a thunderous detonation. The air seemed to tear open. So, here again, we see that use of the terrain and we see the use of really strong verbs and we get a sensory experience out of it. When we read things like the hillside groaned or a hill cracked in half, we feel the massive scale of this godlike power being displayed. This really feels, because of the scale of the action, like the arrival of a god. And notice phrases like the hillsides groaned. This is again an example of taking something and creating an effect other than what the words literally mean together. We don't actually imagine the hillside groaning in the literal sense like an old man would groan, but we can feel that pain of the hillside as it's being damaged by this power and the noise that comes out of it. From the swirling miasma, a figure appeared. First one boot, then the other, crunching down on desiccated flesh, hide, and bone, striding out from the rent, footfalls heavy as stone. Talk about a badass entrance scene, right? If a more epic entrance in fiction exists, please let me know in the comments below because I'm not aware of it. I mean, come on. The geology of the fucking planet is changing because of this guy. And now, from the midst of the swirling base of power, from the midst of this core of energy that's causing all this havoc, a guy just casually walks out and he seems totally indifferent to the carnage he's just caused. So, now that we know what to look for, let's read a bigger chunk this time. Pay attention to the verbs and metaphors. Pay attention to how different sensory cues like sound and temperature and substance are played with to make it more cinematic. The darkness seethed, pulsed. The figure paused, held out a gauntleted left hand. Lightning spanned the darkness, 1,000 crashing drums. The air itself howled, and the darkness streamed down. Withered husks that had once been living things spun upright as if reborn, only to pull free of the ground and whirl skyward like rotted autumn leaves. shrieking wind, torn banners of darkness spiraling inward, wrapping, twisting, binding. Cold air rushed in like floodwaters through a crumbling dam, and all it swept through burst into dust that roiled wild in its wake. Hammering concussion shook the hills, sheared away slopes, leaving rock cliffs, boulders tumbling and pitching through the remnants of carnage. And still the darkness streamed down, converging, coalescing into an elongated silver forming at the end of the figure's outstretched hand. Now, this entire passage that I just read to you is less than 150 words, which is nothing. But look at the vastness of what's being conveyed in those short paragraphs. The hills are shattering. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of corpses, all of which are sucked dry, now swirling around this valley of darkness like dried up autumn leaves. We felt the heat earlier, and now we feel the cold, as Erickson compares the cold air's destructive power to the breaking of a dam, and we see it turn anything it touches to dust. And on top of that, we have more cinematic effects as well, where this aura of darkness covering everything now has streaks of lightning shooting down. And there are so many of them, and it's so loud that it's like 1,000 crashing drums. And again, we visibly see the landscape and geology itself changing, with hills bursting because of this cataclysmic arrival. And then, after all this carnage, Erickson once again shows us what cinematic writing means, as all this destruction just stops as abruptly as it began once he summoned that sword out of the darkness. A final report, loud as the snapping of a dragon's spine, and then sudden silence. A sword, bleeding darkness, dripping cold. Overhead, late afternoon sunlight burned the sky. So, as we can see here, everything just stops, and now there's just silence. And without actually telling us the darkness is gone, Erickson tells us that the darkness is gone, because he now just shows us that the late afternoon sun is burning overhead as if nothing happened, and we know that things have come to a stop. He slowly scanned the ground, even as desiccated fragments of hide and flesh began raining from the heavens. And then he stepped forward, bending down to retrieve a battered scabbard. He slid the sword home. Come on, look at this fucking guy's indifference to all these bodies, and it only makes him seem even more godlike. It only makes this an even cooler scene, as he just casually finds a scabbard and keeps walking as if nothing happened, even as flesh and gore and blood just rains down on him. Let's finish the scene. A sultry wind swept down the length of the valley, gathering streamers of steam. He stood for a minute, studying the scene on all sides. Ah, my love, forgive me. He set out, boots crunching on the dead. Return to the world. Draconus. I mean, come on, guys. This has to be one of the most epic scenes ever written, even in epic fantasy. I mean, to me, this encapsulates what the genre is. Epic fantasy, to me, isn't about having two big armies clash on a battlefield. It's not about having 100 different cultures and kingdoms and religions in your story. All that's fine, all that's world building. But what makes epic fantasy truly epic is a vast imagination and high concept thinking and execution. I mean, just look at the scene that we just read, guys. Let me paraphrase all this in a nutshell. There's this huge battlefield spanning across an entire valley where everyone involved is dead, and then a massive, gigantic aura of power just crashes down and crushes and melts everything. And then the earth is exploding and hills are exploding and there are boulders flying around like pebbles, and the entire valley is just filled with thousands of swirling corpses. And in the midst of this, there's lightning streaking down across the darkness, and the ash flakes look like fireflies, and the wind is howling. And then this cold air just swoops in and vaporizes everything. And now all those swirling corpses around the valley explode, and it starts raining flesh and blood over the entire hillside. And out of this wild core of chaotic power around which all this is happening, a guy just casually walks out and summons a sword. And this huge natural disaster he's caused, it seems to be nothing to him. He's so powerful that, as I said, he's indifferent to all this devastation. He's not even distracted by it. He's just like, oh, I'm sorry, my love, or whatever, referring to something that probably happened like 500,000 years ago. And he just walks away into the sunset like it's nothing. That is epic fantasy to me. The ability to even imagine a scene like that, with things like an entire valley swirling with corpses and exploding hills and all that, to be able to imagine that and then have the skill to write it down on a piece of paper without losing its impact, which is what I alluded to in my previous video as well. Because as I said there, I could have come up with the concept for a scene like this quite easily, right? A god returns to the mortal world and there's destruction everywhere. That's easy as an idea. But how will you convey the enormity of his power to the reader? How will you make the reader experience rather than simply read the epicness of the scene? Well, this is how you would do it. So, well done, Stephen Erickson, truly, to be able to write one of the most epic scenes ever in less than 500 words, to be able to make us experience all that in just a page and a half. That is a level of craft that's truly astounding. So, there you have it, guys. That was one of my favorite scenes in the 10 Big Books. And I hope you agree with me that it's truly one of the most awe-inspiring scenes in the entire series. This is your High Fist. Take care, and I'll see you soon.